Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for what's going to be our last session in this series. We're going to be talking about all things SharePoint today. We have Alex back from Microsoft, who's going to be running the session. We'll have the Q&A tab open as always, so if you have any questions, just look up to the top right-hand corner of your screen, click the little speech bubbles with the question mark and drop any questions you have in there. We may run a little over the 30 minutes today just because SharePoint is a rather big topic, so we'll try and cover off as much as possible. And if you do have to drop off at 12:30, don't worry, we're going to record the session as always, and we'll share it on the Teams tenant and via email as well. So we'll have that ready for you by the end of the week. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Alex.
Perfect. Thanks, Kieran. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining again today. We're going to be taking a look at SharePoint, which I must admit is an absolute beast of an app. It covers so many different things and it has so many different uses, it can be quite confusing. So take this as an introduction to SharePoint. We'll take a look at some of its functionality, hopefully cover some common misconceptions. But you know, when you talk about SharePoint, there is probably weeks of worth of learning and reading you can possibly do around it. So first of all, just accessing SharePoint. So you should be able to find it in your Microsoft homepage. It's a green color and it always has the S logo on there. And when you first launch SharePoint, you'll probably get a page that looks pretty similar to this. So this will show you all the SharePoint sites you're a member of. And if you have the capabilities enabled, you can also come and create sites here. So just as a first off, what actually is SharePoint? So I always think of SharePoint as a library, basically. If you're uploading a document anywhere into Office 365, it's probably going to end up in SharePoint in some shape or form. So an example of this is whenever you set up a Teams site. So whenever you create a Teams group, a SharePoint site is created in the background to hold all the files that go into that Teams. You can also come to SharePoint and create a team site. So this is again purely for sharing documentation, keeping track of documentation. And both that team site and the SharePoint site are always linked to an Office 365 group. So an Office 365 group is basically the permissions a certain group of people will have, and they can access things that are linked to that Office 365 group. So just a reminder, if you create a team site, it creates a SharePoint site in the background. So a good thing to think about when creating your team site, does it need to have a separate SharePoint connected to it? Can that team site suffice with it in itself? You might not need another SharePoint in the background. And the other thing that you can do within SharePoint as well, which is very linked to these communication site pages, is create a really, really great intranet page. So this is where you can have your kind of central repository for the force, linking off to your key force areas, holding lots of key documentation, and always think of an intranet site as a way of comms, so pushing out key messages and updates. But also that more static repository. So whereas in your team site here, you might be uploading files and collaborating on content together and building out content together. When you're in SharePoint and using it more as an intranet page, it's more of that one-stop shop to go to for information or for communications and messaging. So what we're going to start at is just a look at the difference between these two sites. So we're going to start with a team site. So a team site is where you can hold documentation. If you've ever been in a Microsoft Teams team and clicked open in SharePoint, it looks very similar to that. And you can start just by putting the name required for your SharePoint site. So I'll put this as HR group. What it will do is it will check that name hasn't been used by anyone. So it always does a double check to see there's not a SharePoint site set up for that already. You'll get a group email address and a group site address, and you can add a site description as well. Now you can set up some privacy settings. So perhaps if it was going to be linked to your course, intranet site, you might want to make it public so anyone across the org could reach that site and get access to it. Or if this is going to be a site, because it's HR based, it's going to be storing some key private documentation, we're going to keep this one as private. And you can then select a language if required. So when we click next, it's very much like setting up a Microsoft team. It'll say, who do you want to add as an owner? So an owner is a person who might restrict certain permission levels, set up some granularity around a SharePoint site. So you can pop the name in of anyone you might want to be an owner with you. And you can then add members, and these are the people who are going to come and consume the content within that SharePoint site. So I'll just put a couple of names in for the minute. You can obviously add people after you create your SharePoint site. You don't have to do it at this stage. So when you set up your SharePoint team site, this is what it will look like. You have your navigation bar down the left-hand side. You get a home page, and this is fully customizable. We're going to take a look at that. And importantly, you've got documents, which is your document repository. So this is where you can set up a file and folder structure, put in subfolders, and you've got all the good metadata around the documents that will be stored in here as well. So first thing we're going to focus on is just in this document areas is creating a folder structure. So you can come and upload folders if you've already got them on an existing file store area. You can come to folder and choose from your desktop to bring into the SharePoint site. You can also come to new and set up a folder structure. So I'll put one for CVs, one for new job roles. And there we go. So super easy to create a folder structure, and obviously if I click on one of these folders, I can do subfolders off the top of that. To get content in, again, I can come to upload and choose file and folder, or very similar to Teams as well. If I open a document, I can drag and drop across the screen and let go to have my document uploaded into SharePoint. And you'll also notice in here, same as Teams as well, you can choose to start a document in here from scratch. So if we were starting a PowerPoint from scratch, rather than opening in Teams, it would open it as a web browser version. And I can just put in here, HR presentation. And because you started it in that SharePoint site, as soon as you finish, you can literally just click off this or close. You've got auto save running, and you'll be able to find it in your HR group. I can't remember what we clicked on, but one of these folders, you'll be able to find it in there. So just some key things to know around navigating around SharePoint. So always look at the top here. So if I go down a folder level, you can dive back by this folder level trail at the top here. If I click on a document, I can come to the right-hand side and look out for the three dots in here. And this is where you can have some functionality around your documents within SharePoint. So really important is version history. So if you've been collaborating on a document with someone, you'll be able to see all the different changes when they happened, and you can also come and view them and restore back. So version history is a really key one within SharePoint. Also key to point out, move to and copy to. So if I decided to copy this document, what it would do is it would leave this document in place within this HR group SharePoint site, but it would take a copy of the most recent version of that document, and I can move it to either my OneDrive or any of my other SharePoint sites. So just a reminder, if you do a copy, that will just take your most recent version of that document and leave one in this current SharePoint site. But if I was to move the document, you can see it's exactly the same toolbar that appears on this right-hand side, but it would take all previous versions of the document. It wouldn't leave it in this HR group SharePoint site we'd set up. So if I wanted to move this to the Chief Officer group, it would completely move the document and its whole version history and metadata with it. So just really key from when thinking around moving things around within SharePoint. Also in here, you have got Manage Access. So Manage Access is really important as it allows you to give different permission levels to your documents. So there's some really simple ones. What you can do is allow members to have editing access. So can they come in and open this document and make changes? You can restrict it to read-only access. So if I selected to can view, it means Nesta, who I added as one of my members. And a member generally means you're internal to the force, but you've got access to that site. Now Nesta only has can view access, so he could come in and view this presentation document, but not make any changes. And the final option you've got in here is group visitors. So this might be if you shared a document out with anyone external to view that document or to work on that document. You can also here decide to stop sharing it or give them the wider ability to edit. So this is where a SharePoint site can come in quite handy. So just a little background on this. I mentioned briefly at the start that when you're in a team site, all these files in the background is actually a SharePoint site, and you'll have this open in SharePoint site to get that page similar to what we've been working on for this team. So why it's quite handy that there is that difference between SharePoint and Teams, it means that I can keep all my chats and conversations in one place in my team. But if I need to send a quick share of a document that sits within my site, I can allow that to be shared to someone outside of the team without them getting access to all of those conversations, great links, perhaps plans that might be in there. So if I needed to do that, what you could do is come to this little share icon that sits next to your document in SharePoint, and it would bring up an option to send link. And what you can do is put in specific people. There we go. You can choose if you want them to allow editing or just to view it. And you can also opt in to block the download of that document as well. So if I was to give this to Alex Wilbur to see, it means even though he's not in my Microsoft Teams team, he's getting access to this document through SharePoint. He won't be able to see any of the other folders or whatnot in there, but it just allows me to send a quick link to this document to Alex. I've not had to get another copy to send across to him. And at any point, I can always come to my three dots, select manage access, and I can see here, I can remove Alex if needed. I can restrict it so visitors have, it's already on here, only read-only access and not editing access. So it does just give you an extra granularity on permissions sharing through SharePoint. So a good thing to take into account there. So we've just covered sharing from within SharePoint. I always get this bar at the top. Let me just jump back to the page we were creating. We've had a look how we can set up a quick folder structure and put some documents in here. And just to show you a reminder, if you need to share, look for the little arrow and the three dots to bring up some options around the document. So copy link will always give you a URL linking to that document. So again, here you can update the permission levels similar to clicking share, and just out you can also find the navigation bar. Open will choose how you want to open that document in the browser or is it in the app. Preview will give you a little pane that appears within SharePoint. I've not had to leave SharePoint, but I can do a quick print from here or a quick run through the document. And we had a look at manage access. So one thing you might want to look at is automate. So this is a link to Power Automate from within Teams. So we covered this the other week. I can come to Power Automate and create a flow, and I'll get a little guidelines of what I might want to set up as an automation. So these are kind of the most popular ones we see most commonly used, linking SharePoint to other parts of Power Automate. So it might be posting a message to Teams, requesting an approval in Teams, but loads of different Power Automates you can link into SharePoint here at the side. And just the final option, simply rename pin to the top. That's quite a handy one. If it's a really important document, you can make sure you can easily find it and it sends it to the top there. And we've had a look at move to, copy to, and version history. This is quite an interesting one. It's working on a lot of programs and projects together. You've got an alert me option. So it means if I left my permission levels fairly open, so members within this team had edit capabilities, I could set up an alert so that if anyone changes this document or someone else changes a document created by me, I'd get a notification either by email, can even get a text message sent to myself, so I'm aware of that. And you can choose if you want it immediately, or if you've got a lot of documents that are being edited, you might just want a daily notification or a weekly summary on what's been changed. So a great way to keep on top of things and what's being changed within your SharePoint sites as well. And then just the final one to cover here on more. So this is where you can do check-in, check-out. So obviously in the new way of working in cloud-based solutions, we're used to doing co-editing together, so having lots of people in a document at the same time. And if you still want to use a check-in, check-out process, so I'm going to check out this presentation, and until I'm finished with it, no one else can check it out. And just so you're aware, this would also pull through to Teams as well. So you get a little notification if someone had a document checked out from the Teams view. And finally, workflow. So this is if you've got any automation set up around this document. So really important within Teams too is this little I button on the side. So rather than clicking the 3 dots here, this gives you a full activity trail on what's happening on your documents. You normally get a little preview on what's going on as well. So a great place to keep a lookout on your documents. So that's the key thing around documents within a SharePoint site. And you'll also notice if you've created the SharePoint site first and want a team site later, you notice in the bottom left-hand corner, I've got a little message that says, do you want a team so you can communicate with your colleagues? So if I was to create team here, what this would do is set up my team site with this SharePoint site in the background. So just one click, if I click here, it takes me to my team. I'm going to put news on the web app. There we go, and it should take us to our HR group team. Perfect, so I can see here I've got my HR group team. I come into files, I've got my folder. Well, it might take a little while just to launch, but I should have a link to my SharePoint site appearing in the background there. Next thing just to show you guys is a little top tip. So if you are using Teams quite heavily, what you can do is there's this add cloud storage option. So say you've already got an established SharePoint site, it's got lots of documents in, and lots of people need to do uploads in there. It could be policies, it could be forms that are used within the force. So what I can do is come to add cloud storage and select SharePoint, obviously as a third party options in there. And it will say which other SharePoint site do I want to link to. So what I could potentially do is come to that HR group site. Let me find it. There's a little bar at the top. That's very annoying. Here we go. If I was to just come to my home page here and copy and paste the SharePoint site, I'm going to select use a SharePoint link, copy my URL in there. It will find my SharePoint site. If I click next, it will just say documents. Yep, want to do that and add the folder. So what we should see in a minute is it's brought in a connection to my SharePoint site. If I click on this, I'll be able to see all the content of that SharePoint site, and I can upload content into here. So I'm not having to remember to open a SharePoint site in the background or move something there. It's just as if it's ingrained within my Teams site. So it does look a little bit different. You'll notice it's got a little link sign to show this isn't based on this Teams SharePoint site, but it does link straight into that other site. So just a few points on Teams and Teams sites. So next thing I just want to cover with you guys is customization within SharePoint sites. So if we come to the home page, this is where you can customize how this looks. Similarly, you can also come to edit and you can remove all of these different options. So you've got OneNote in here. This will talk around your site pages. So if you want to keep your SharePoint site really clean, you'll notice you can remove it. So I could just have a home page and documents if I really wanted. But what I want to spend a little time on this is, if any of you were using SharePoint on premise in the past, you'll probably be familiar with JSON and coding and how tricky and difficult it was to get a SharePoint page looking nice. So the nice thing about SharePoint Online is, if you're a team owner, you'll just get this edit option at the top. And so then things are just set up into little hero segments. So if I click on one, I can come and edit them. And you'll also notice this little plus sign. This is where you can add different modules to go into your home page. So if I didn't like activity here, I could delete activity, and instead I could come and add a new web part. And this shows me a list of all the different parts I can link in. So if my force is using Yammer, I could link to a Yammer group in there. I could put a countdown timer to something happening. I could put an events list in here, a group calendar. You can even put a form in. So if you want to do a quick survey or a quick knowledge check with someone. So there's a wealth of things you can link to in here, and even a few external sources as well. So what I'm going to do for an example is I'm just going to come and link some, what should we do? I'm just going to put, how's it gone? Take a photo. I'm just going to come and put a, we'll put a stream in. So this is where I can choose to link to the whole of stream. I can choose a specific video. I'm going to go for a single video, and I just need to put the link to that video in here, or I can pick a specific channel as well. But it's just a really quick way to say, get a quick link to all my videos in my team site. So super easy to change and update, a lot easier than it used to be on premise. And it just means you can make a page look quite interactive, bring lots of content in quite quickly. Now, this has been everything on team site so far. So we're just going to jump back to SharePoint to take a little look at how a communication site differs. So again, this is more for around your intranet pages. You might want to use a communication site. It's supposed to be very visually appealing, but might not rely as much on documents. So I'm going to put in here course events. There we go. And oh, actually I clicked a bit faster. And you can choose on the right hand side what kind of communication sites you want to set up. So if I click on here and come to this drop down on the left, topic gives you quite a few different modules you can customize. Showcase is more focusing on big images, or you can start from blank where you can create each of the little modules that build up your team site. So let's just go back into the one we just created. Where's it gone? You'll find it here. Let's start again then. So the focus on your communication sites, as I mentioned, is all around the content that's going in there. So let's do a showcase because it looks a little different. Put in here comms. Again, it'll do all your checks. And when we finish, we should get the little basis of the site. You can see it differs. Rather than having that left-hand side toolbar, you have it running along the top here. We can see it's a lot more around focused on images. And again, we can come to edit and change these. So this is just a template you can get started with. But same as before, we can change these images, update these passages, but we could also change them out if we wanted. So just two different looks between your comms site. To mention, the comms is more for your intranet pages. You can do drop downs that come off this page as well, and there's loads to research on kind of hub sites around SharePoint pages too. So what to look out for is you've got this search bar at the top. This will search across all of your SharePoint sites. So I'm in here now. So if I come back to my home page, this would look across all my different sites, my files, even people as well. So internally, I tend to use Microsoft as that one-stop shop to go for looking for things where I'm not quite sure where they might sit. It's got a really good search functionality with anything that ends up in SharePoint. And this is obviously based on what you have access to as well. So it will only show up what you have access to your Office 365 groups and permission levels. I've just seen a question coming going, can we link on-premise SharePoint? How easy is it to do that? So it's a tricky one, Anita. I think it's Anita from South Yorkshire. I'm not exactly sure. You probably need some further guidance on it. It's a lot harder than just linking to the SharePoint online page that we showed, but it's not impossible. You can put a link to it, a web link. You won't have that interactivity in the uploading that we saw. Just another question, too, with all the collaboration tools available, what function does Notebook normally play for users? In other words, what benefit does Notebook have being on SharePoint? Really great question from Steve there. So I'll just dive into this HR group that we created. So Notebook here is basically a OneNote. So just like the OneNote that you have linked into your team site, Notebook is exactly the same. This is the one it will prompt you to link into your team site if you create your team section. And the benefit is that you know that whatever you put into this Notebook is going to be shared with the people in that SharePoint site and within that Office 365 group. So it's just like a OneNote like you've seen demoed in Teams. It's exactly the same. The only benefit is you know the control and the permissions, that it's for everyone in that group. No one else outside the group will see that. But great question there, Steve. Cool. So let me just dive back into the home page. Cool. So I know we're approaching to 12:30 already. We've absolutely rattled through quite a lot of content. So just as a reminder, we think of SharePoint as being your library or your intranet pages. So creating either really beautiful pages that you can link together as an intranet site. And there's even those that, of course, they're doing with bots in this space. Devon and Cornwall are using great kind of virtual agents to find information. And it's worthwhile just playing around with the communication sites to see how that's going to look. My number one advice would be really plan your SharePoint sites if you're going to be setting up an internet page. And this leads me nicely into some links that I'm just going to share with you guys quickly. So here I've just come to learn.microsoft.com. So you might have heard in my previous weeks, this is where all the learning modules, what we have to complete to keep our knowledge up to date sit. And there is absolutely tons on here on SharePoint. You can see I've done quite a few of them. So really recommend reading this Plan for SharePoint module. There's also the collaboration and understanding your SharePoint site options, as well as managing SharePoint. So all of these modules you can see here, and I've just literally combined them and searched are really to set up. And as you can see here, there's also others linking into OneDrive, how you can customize it and extend it as well. So a really good site. Just recommend going through a few of these modules if you're considering how to set up your SharePoint and just get a better understanding of how everything fits in together. We've also got our SharePoint help and learning page. This is support.microsoft.com/SharePoint. So this is where you can do loads of videos. You can just get the basics on SharePoint, information on how to create sites and sync them up. So it's a great place to come just to get some good grounding and watch some videos or read some articles on sharings, permissions, and those kinds of things. The next area I'm going to show you guys, so this is lookbooks.microsoft.com. So this is where you can see loads of examples of how other people have set up their intranet sites within SharePoint. So you can see here what a site might look like for leadership connection, how you might want to do some news pages. This is generally based on all out of the box on SharePoint. So there's nothing that you can see on here that's a template that needs loads of extra customization. It's just based on those modules what we looked at today. So we're just coming to have a look here to see a bit of the art of the possible, and there's a really good PDF you can download too. So if we just come to community and it's a charitable site, for example, you can see here it'll show you all the different parts involved, and you can quite quickly add this to your tenant as well. So if you're an admin, you can actually just launch these straight onto your own SharePoint site. So a really good place to drop in and have a look. So that was everything I was going to cover today, because we've got half an hour on SharePoint. I hope that's been a good introduction. Just think files, it's going to end up in SharePoint, and you've got your two basic types of sites, team sites and a communication site. And just think, if you're uploading files within Teams, in the background, it's actually got a SharePoint site in there. So I will look for any more questions coming through. If there's any specifics you'd like to see or understand on SharePoint, because it does just go for miles and miles for what you can do with it, do send them through, and we could perhaps do a more tailored webinar on a certain topic within SharePoint. Oops, I've got another question. What has the experience of forces you've worked with who already have an on-premise SharePoint intranet? When do forces adopt Office 365 as an organisation? Do forces tend to move completely to an Office 365 intranet, retain their on-premise setup, or do they run a hybrid? Great question there from Rich Brown. So what I commonly see happening is people will generally start to set up teams. They'll start using Teams for projects. They'll get their maybe org-wide team set up, and in the background, they're having their SharePoint sites created. Now, what they're doing while this is happening is they've got the collaboration aspect going, and they might be using their old on-premise SharePoint intranet page. And this is where you can start to plan how to migrate that on-premise SharePoint to a SharePoint online. And what a lot of forces I've seen have been doing is kind of almost starting from scratch, as they found that their old on-premise SharePoint sites have got absolutely masses of data in there. No one can find anything. There's not anything logical around how it's being stored, and it's probably not been updated for a good kind of 10 years. So what a lot of forces I've spoken to are doing is kind of completely rewriting the book when it comes to their new intranet pages. They're thinking, having a landing page perhaps with a chatbot in there to help people find what they need, reducing the amount of subsections that come off their site. So they've really been taking a bit of a blank slate. And that's absolutely fine. And what you can do is, if there's those key document areas, you can start to turn them to kind of read only within your on-premise site as you start to move people to the online version. So the content could still be there, but might not be updatable as you try and move people onto using Teams and OneDrive or having SharePoint sites in the background. So I think kind of as a high level, you kind of need to do it in bits, I'd say, Rich. The internet's often the last thing people get to, as it is quite a big project, and a lot of forces have been kind of starting from the ground up, thinking how they can modernize their current intranet page and make it a lot more accessible and easy to use for people. Many forces have got partners involved as well to help them design it out, or to help them decide their structure. But I think you just need to spend some time on that design bit of your new SharePoint to think how it's going to work, and try not to just maybe not do a lift and shift if that content isn't being accessed currently at the minute. So huge question there. If you want to have a discussion offline on that, happy to have that offline. But yeah, interesting state, and it's not an easy or a quick process as well. Just had a question come in. Is there a learning portal for Office 365? Great question. So I would recommend, if you're wanting to do specific learning modules and you're specifically a little bit technical minded, I would recommend coming to, oh, where's that open my site? Oh, here we go. I'd recommend coming to learn.com. So this is our Microsoft page, and it's not just got SharePoint in here, it's got the whole of Office 365. Do beware with these, even though it says beginner and intermediate, they're probably more the program manager, perhaps more technical side. Anyone who's involved with the Office 365 program, do take a look on here. If you're looking for more general support on Office 365, you'll want this site, and this is just support.microsoft.com. So this is more for kind of end users, little videos. You can browse between the different apps here. So this is more for, people who might not be involved in the technical aspects, but they're just wanting to learn a bit more. There is also a new adoption page as well. You can see I have got lots of favorites in here. We just dive to it. So if any of you who have joined today are from the kind of champions or change management or adoption teams, this is a new website we just launched called adoption.microsoft.com. And this is where you can get all the right tools to building a champions network, get some information on training. So we've got Microsoft 365 here, train your org, and if we click on get started, it will ask you what tool are you deploying and how best to go around that. So if I click on Microsoft Teams, for example, this will give me, select train my org. This will give me lots of great tools for how to plan training, how to download some quick start guides and whatnot as well. So another one to bear in mind for anyone who's running that strand for their org. Perfect. Any more questions? Yeah, and also just to let you know on that training point that Mike and David and the NEP L&D team have a great, I think it's enabling center, do correct me if I'm wrong, which is going to be an L&D site with all centralized materials, all based for police forces and what has been used. So I think one of our first webinars when we kick off in September, David and Mike are going to run you through the setup of Enabling Center and how to access that. So do keep your ears peeled and eyes peeled for that coming out soon. I think that's it, Stuart.
Lovely. That was brilliant. Thanks again for that, Alex. And I did mention at the beginning that this was going to be the last one in the series, but I've been corrected, and I'll have to correct some of the comms that have gone out as well, because we are doing one more session next Wednesday, which is going to look at accessibility. So it's a really useful session, something that we're all very aware of and that we need to be updated with. So we're going to host that again next Wednesday at 12 o'clock. I'll send out the webinar link and all the associated information and the recording to this webinar on Friday of this week. So keep your eyes peeled for that. But that was another great session. Thank you very much, Alex, and thanks everyone for joining in. Another really good attendance today. We had about 40 people on the call. So really good to hear all things SharePoint. And as I say, you'll hear from us later on in the week about the session next week.